Hello everybody and welcome. In today's video we are going to be covering the quadratic formula, and we're going to be going over these three examples that are shown here on the screen. So without further ado, let's get it. Alrighty, example number 1. We have negative 2x squared plus 11x plus 6 is equal to 0. And before we begin, what we want to do is make sure that it's in the correct form. And the correct form is this one right here on the top right, where basically it's all the terms are going to be on the left side of the equation, and you want a 0 on the right side of the equation. So in this case, we already have the correct form, so that is great, and we can begin. Now what we want to do is figure out what our a, b, and c terms are going to be. So a is the number that's in front of the x squared. So in this case it is negative 2. B is the number in front of the x, so that is 11. And c is the number that's by itself, which is 6. All right. So now we have our a, b's, and c's. We can go ahead and plug that into our quadratic formula here. So we have x is equal to negative b, so negative 11, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so 11 squared, minus 4 times a is negative 2 times c is 6. And the whole thing is all going to be divided by 2 times a, which is negative 2. All right, so let's go ahead and simplify here. We got x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 121. And negative 4 times negative 2 is 8, times 6 is 48, and that's going to be positive here, plus 48, just because the two negatives, they make a positive. And that's going to be all over negative 4. All right, so let's go ahead and simplify a little bit more. You have x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 169, all divided by negative 4. All right, and now I'm going to take this over here to the right side and simplify a little bit more. So we got x is equal to negative 11 plus or minus the square root of 169 is 13. And that is all divided by negative 4. All right, so now what we want to do is figure out what our x's are, or our solutions here. So you can see on the top that there's a plus minus sign here. So that means we're going to pretty much separate this into two different equations, if you want to call it that. So you got x is equal to negative 11 plus 13 divided by negative 4. And you have x is equal to negative 11 minus 13 all over negative 4. All right, so now let's just do the math real quick. Let's start with the left one. X is equal to negative 11 plus 13 is 2. So you get 2 over negative 4. And then that is going to reduce further into negative 1/2. So that is one of our answers there. And then the next one, we have x is equal to negative 11 minus 13. So x is equal to, that is negative 24 divided by negative 4. And when you simplify that further, you get x is equal to 6. So those are our two answers. And what this is telling you is that if you were to plug in any one of these numbers back into the original equation all the way up here, your equation will be a true equation. So if you were to plug in x equals negative 1/2 into all the x's, you'll get 0 equals to 0, and that will be the correct answer. So example number 1 is now complete. Example number 2. So we have x squared minus 4x is equal to negative 5. So step 1 is we want to get this equation into this form here, where we have all the terms on the left side and a 0 on the right side. So our equation is not in the proper form, and what we want to do is add 5 to both sides to get it into that correct form there. So that we have x squared minus 4x plus 5 is equal to 0. So now our equation is in the correct form. Let's find our a, b, and c. So a is the number in front of the x squared, which is 1. B is in front of the x, which is negative 4. and c is the number by itself, which is 5. All right, so we have our a, b, and c's. Let's go ahead and plug that into the quadratic formula here. We got x is equal to negative b, so b is negative 4, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 4 squared, minus 4 times a times c, and that is all over 2 times a, just like that. So now let's go ahead and simplify. X is equal to negative negative 4, which is positive 4, plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16, and then negative 4 times 1 times 5 is negative 20, and that is all over 2. All right, so let's continue simplifying here. X is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 over 2. All right, and before we continue, just one note here. So the square root is, you want to find two numbers that multiply into each other. That's pretty much what the square root is. So in this case, we have a negative, and there's no two numbers that are the same that can multiply to give you a negative, right? Because two negatives gives you a positive. So that's not going to work. So what we do is we basically split that up to look like this. 4 times negative 1, which will give you that negative 4 there. And then this 4 here, we can break down because the square root of 4 is 2. However, to represent this square root of negative 1 here, this we write down as a I, just like that, which is called an imaginary number. So whenever you have a negative in here, that means you're pretty much just going to be using an I to represent that negative. Okay, so after that little brief note, let's go ahead and continue here. So we have x is equal to 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 is 2i. And that is going to be divided by 2. All right. So now we have it right where we want it. We want to split it up into 2. So x is equal to 4 plus 2i divided by 2. And then we also have x is equal to 4 minus 2i over 2, just like that. Okay, since we have the plus or minus sign, we break that up into 2. So now let's go ahead and simplify these here. So we got on the left one, we got x is equal to 4 divided by 2 is 2 plus 2 divided by 2 is 1. And then we have an I there. So that is our first solution. And then the second one is going to be the same thing. So x is equal to 4 divided by 2 is 2. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative. So we have 2 minus I. So those are our two answers there. And this is going to be our final answer. So example number 2 is complete. Example number 3, we have 1/2 x squared minus x plus 1/3 is equal to 0. So what we could see is that it's already in the correct form here, where everything is on the left and a 0 is on the right. And what we want to do is kind of simplify this a little bit more. Let's get rid of those fractions because nobody likes a fraction. So how we do that is we find the LCD. So I'm going to do that over here on the left side. And pretty much you take both of those numbers, the two denominators there, and you just keep going in multiples of those. So 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, and then 3 times 1 is 3, 3 times 2 is 6. So here's our common number here, or LCD, and we multiply the entire equation by that LCD. So let's go ahead and do that, just like that. And we can go ahead and simplify this a little bit more. So 6 halves is 3. So we got 3x squared. 6 times negative x is negative 6x. And then 6 over 3 is 2. So plus 2 is equal to 0. Okay, so now we eliminated the fractions. We have it in the form that we want. Let's go ahead and write down our a, b, and c terms. So a is 3, b is negative 6, and c is 2. Okay, so now we go ahead and plug that into our quadratic formula. X is equal to negative b, so negative, and then b is negative 6, plus or minus the square root of b squared, so negative 6 squared, minus 4 times a, which is 3, times c, which is 2, and that is all over 2 times a, which is 3. Just like that. So let's go ahead and simplify a bit. X is equal to negative 6 is positive 6, plus or minus the square root. Negative 6 squared is 36. Minus 4 times 3 is 12, times 2 is 24. And that is all over 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, so let's simplify this a little bit more, and I'm going to bring this up over here. X is equal to 6 plus or minus the square root of 36 minus 24 is 12, and that is going to be divided by 6. All right, so let's go ahead and look at that square root of 12 here. That is just going to be equal to 2 radical 3. And the way you do that, just to go over it real quick, is you pretty much go ahead and do some prime factorization. So 12 can be broken up into 3 times 4, which can be broken up into 2 times 2. So these are all the prime factors. And you can see that you have 2 2's here, so you can pull one out. And there's only one 3, so that stays inside of the square root here. So let me just show you that here. So this 2 is right here. That 3 hops over that, and it's right there. Okay, so let's go on to the next page and continue this here. Okay, example number 3 continued. So let's go ahead and simplify this here. We know that radical 12 is 2 radical 3, so we got 6 plus or minus 2 radical 3 over 6. And now we have the plus or minus sign, so let's go ahead and break this up into the two separate x values here. So we got x is equal to 6 plus 2 radical 3 over 6. And then we have x is equal to 6 minus 2 radical 3 over 6. So let's go ahead and simplify the first one first. So we got x is equal to 6 divided by 6 is 1, plus 2 over 6 is 1/3. So we have 1/3 and then a radical 3, just like that. So that is going to be one answer. Now let's look at the left-hand side, or the right-hand side, I should say. X is equal to 1 minus 1/3 radical 3. So those are our two answers here. And now example number 3 is complete.